Exciting news here at One Idea Away. The book, Uncovering the Life of Your Dreams by IPEC founder, also my business partner, Bruce D. Schneider, is now available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Books A Million. It's an enlightening story of a character who finds himself asking some challenging questions. Is this all there is? What's the purpose of my life? He goes on a very unique journey to be able to uncover who he is at his core. You're going to hear about 5 portals, which are essentially pathways that help us to peel back the layers on who we think we are. Each of these pathways helps us experience life in a whole new light, becoming more centered, fulfilled, and at home with ourselves with every step. Gene Houston, the pioneer in human potential, says the novel evokes higher dreams of who and what we really are and what yet may be. Tal Ben-Shahar, well-reputed best-selling author and famed former Harvard professor of happiness, shares Bruce Schneider has written a personal odyssey with universal implications, and that it can guide you to more fulfillment and happiness. And Mary O'Malley, the famed teacher and author of What's in the Way is the Way, shares this: there is something deep inside of each of us, something inviting us out of our everyday world into the world that we long for. And Uncovering the Life of Your Dreams shares the process of remembering who we really are at our core. If you want to learn more about Bruce D. Schneider, you can actually check out the interview that we did with him very recently. So check that out right here on the podcast feed. And otherwise, be sure to get out there and pick up your copy of Uncovering the Life of Your Dreams today at any of the major online book retailers. And now, on to our show. Hi there, and welcome to One Idea Away, not just a podcast, but a community and ongoing conversation meant to inspire and empower individuals to live more fully, deeply, and consciously. Let's jump into today's episode right now. Let's kick off today's show quoting from our guest's book. Our society is fixated on the achievement of success and happiness, and the irony is that obsessing over those slippery concepts is what moves us further and further away from them. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more anxious and awake you become. So what's the solution? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Today, our guest is Tom Asacker. He's an educator, business advisor, internationally published author. His inspiring combination of down-to-earth philosophy and intellectual reasoning has given him supporters all over the world. And for the past 10 years, he's been advising leaders that the traditional engines of growth have run out of steam. He views today's world of complexity and change as a large-scale manifestation of many emergent events and behaviors that require a new, more human viewpoint to guide one's actions. Now, Tom is predominantly known for several critically acclaimed business books, such as The Business of Belief and A Little Less Conversation. He speaks and advises very well-known corporations and brands and universities on things like leadership and management and branding and so much more. He's even been recognized as the George Land Innovator of the Year Award and other recognitions by Inc. magazine and MIT and the Young Entrepreneurs Organization, which is why we're not going to talk to Tom about any of those things today on the interview. Instead, what I really wanted to do was focus on a completely different idea and a completely different book that Tom wrote called I Am Keats. Now, Keats is a reference to the 19th century English Romantic poet, but the book is not specifically about Keats. It's about what he came to represent for Tom. And I just wanted to share a little bit about where this comes from in terms of when Tom wrote the book, because he was in a place in life where he was seriously stuck. And this was the description that stood out to me, which is why I thought about you guys as the listeners and doing this show and talking about this. So I don't think it was depression. I didn't feel sad or worthless. I felt spiritless and confused. I'd spent a lifetime studying psychology and philosophy, mythology, brain science, human decision-making, blah, 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 and I could not make a meaningful decision to save my life. Well, for everybody listening out there, have you ever been there before? Because I know there's a lot of seekers and lifelong learners, coaches, mindfulness practitioners, seminar junkies, and pop psych readers that are listening right now. I know that because I am one. That's why I started the show. And with all that knowing, and all of that knowing that Tom has well beyond that, somehow we do get stuck, and then we don't know which way is up. That's what caught my attention about I Am Keats and Tom Asacker. And so with that, let's get him on the show so that we can get to the bottom of this. Tom, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on One Idea Away.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, I saw in your writing And one of the things that you just happen to mention, and I know it's kind of a mantra for you, is memento mori, which means remember that you must die. You actually wanted to begin your books, one of your books, that way, and ultimately just decided against it. I'm curious, why was that something that you may have actually wanted to begin a book with?
Yeah, I didn't decide not to use that. My publisher wouldn't let me use it.
Better said.
Yeah, so they spun it into carpe diem. Right. And what I find interesting is that the whole spirit of carpe diem, which is live for today, implies that you're not looking beyond today.
Yes.
Which means you can die tomorrow. And so that brings us back to memento mori, right? Remember, you will die. Because if once you remember that and that everybody around you is going to be dead soon, then you stop taking everything that you're doing in life so seriously. You don't get really stuck on these crazy objectives and goals that you have that you can't figure out how to make happen. It all becomes, you're kind of going through life in this spirited way where you're relaxed about everything because you realize how it all ends. I mean, I tell people all the time when I see frustration and confusion in their face, I say, look, I can tell you what your future is, and I'll get this sideways glance like, go ahead, tell me my future. And I said, you're going to end up with bugs eating your eyes, just like me and everyone else. So loosen up a little bit. Take that pressure off yourself and everybody around you.
We all do have a story that ends the same way, huh?
Yeah, it's not happily ever after, is it?
No.
But see, that's
at least as far as we know. We'll leave that. We'll leave that to another show, another time.
Right.
But Tom, I'm curious. What was the driving force? Meaning, what was really going on in your life at this time? We'll talk about the kind of where this idea came from in a moment. But what was really going on that set you up for the idea that you were going to have?
Yeah, well, I had written a book probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years prior about how to get people to adopt your ideas. It was called The Business of Belief, and the fact that beliefs and emotions drive everyone's decisions. It's not a rational thinking process. And I had spent a lot of time traveling and working with some pretty big clients that wanted to change what they were doing and wanted to employ these principles. And they just weren't doing it. When I revisited a year later, nothing changed. And I was becoming really down about this because everyone wants to be compensated for their work, but you also want it to have meaning and to make change in people. And I wasn't seeing any of that change. And that really, really frustrated me. I couldn't see any way out of that.
So then you happen to get together with a friend of yours, you're meeting for a cup of coffee or lunch or what have you. And what happens? Because there's kind of an inciting, a completely out of the blue inciting incident, as it were.
Yeah, it was really interesting because we were just catching up and he was telling me about his grown children, and I have 2 grown children. And he said that his son, 20-something-year-old son, was stuck at home. And he's so damn smart that we just can't reason with him. We can't get him going again. And, knowing that how people make decisions and the fact that he's really just relying on past experiences and memories to drive all of this, I thought to myself, if we could just wipe his memory clean, we could start his life anew. And it was just a strange, random thought in my head.
Yeah.
I really think I was describing myself almost while I was thinking about this. And I got in my car and I started driving. I said, that would make a really interesting premise for a movie. And it was just a strange idea. So I set off to write a screenplay for a movie. And that's when everything just went out of control.
It kind of took on a life of its own. But it's amazing because this curse of knowledge that we seem to be acquiring, and that there is so much of that we know everything about everything because of the devices in our pocket, as it were, that connects us to everything. And yet there is so much more that's underneath it. And I think this is the thing that was particularly interesting to me. And I want to frame it this way because this was actually, I'm not sure if this line was actually from the book. It's just a different line that I've heard from you, that there's a movie playing in your head and you think that it's you. It is not you. And it relates to so much of what's going on for us right now. And so I'm curious if you could explain a little bit about, well, what's the movie? And if it's not you, who is it?
It's really interesting because you know how this came to me was working with Hollywood consultants trying to figure out how to write a screenplay. It's much different than writing books or novels. And as I'm getting into this, I'm realizing how the backstories of the characters have to be fully developed in your mind before you can start writing their behaviors and their actions, and how you have to keep things consistent. And these people are stereotypical and cliched characters. And because if you do something out of the ordinary, it'll what they call snap the audience out of their suspension of disbelief. They'll wonder what's going on, and they'll lose that hypnotic trance of watching the movie. And my co-writer and I were, when we were working on this, we were trying to make every scene really interesting and exciting, and everything that they tell you to do in screenwriting, you know, the experts tell you to do. And we got to one particular scene, and there wasn't enough happening. And she said about one of our characters, who we have really developed everything about this person, where he went to school, his childhood, everything. And she said to me, let's have Phil do this. And I had a visceral reaction to that. I mean, a negative one. Mm-hmm. I said to her, Phil would never do that. And then I felt myself step away from my body, looking at myself, repeating those words. Yeah. And I said, I said to her, don't you realize what just happened? And she said, what? I said, we can't make a fictional character that we made up do something. Can you imagine what happens to real human beings? Yeah. Right? And that's what's going on. We're conditioned by everyone around us. And so it's hard for us to step out of these roles that we think that we need to stay coherent in. And that's what I mean by the movie in your head. There is a director in your mind that's always trying to keep you consistent and coherent, so he doesn't snap anybody else out of their little movies that they're running in their heads about you.
You know, it's amazing because it's incredible, because when I saw you talking about this and this idea of how much we want to maintain that coherence, and then especially with all of the other work that you've done, but even what you present in I Am Keats, how much our beliefs and our past experiences and everything that's wired into us shows us, well, no, this is who our character is. Phil only acts this way. We only act that way. And it's so difficult for us to break out of that pattern.
Yeah, because listen, it's hardwired in us. Yeah. Evolutionary. It's hardwired in us because look, as soon as we're born, right? Think about it. We're thrown onto a movie set and we don't even know what's going on. I mean, there's bright lights and we don't know the language people are speaking and who are these characters, and we want to survive. So we start interacting with all these people on the set, getting our cues from them, figuring out how we should be, what we should do to make sure that we stay on this set, that we survive. Maybe we'll thrive even if we perform properly in this show. Mm-hmm. And so we start integrating all of this information that they throw at us. We don't know whether it's true or not. We don't know what to eat. We don't know what to say. We don't know anything. So we start integrating all of this information in us, right? Which is the script. We take the script and we start believing in it. And then we look at things in life and people start telling us what all these things are because they're just props on our movie set, right? So we don't look at a crow as like a little child does for the first time. Yeah. We say, oh, crow, that's a trash eater. Because we're rapidly trying to move through this movie. We don't want to slow it down. The director goes crazy when you say, let's slow down and let me think a little bit about what's going on here. Yeah. It's almost like somebody in a business meeting saying, let's all slow down for a minute. You know what happens when you do that, right?
Oh, the 2/3 of everybody just listening right now just cringed at the idea of slowing down in the business meeting. I could feel it. You know, it's amazing because you combine everything you just described and you add to that our nature as social beings and this desire that we have to belong and to fit in. And so now we're being told, and all of these told what's what and what does this mean? Here's what all of the expectations are. We want to move in that direction because we do want to fit in. Now all of a sudden we have an identity that is recognized a certain way, both by others as well as by us. And we've done an incredible job of making sure that we believe every element of this movie is real. So
listen, we're hypnotized. It's not even that we're saying, let me move through life in order to have people like me. And it's not even that. It's this visceral feeling below our own level of conscious awareness, because to us, social rejection is death. We believe that, because in the tribal days, if we got rejected, we were dead.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, go give a speech, and you've never given a speech before, this visceral feeling that you have is social rejection, which is death. And that's why you have that fight or flight response and cortisol flowing through your veins, because it's like, oh, geez, So we don't get it. We don't get that this is an illusion that we've been conditioned into. That's it.
And so at what point does Keats enter the scene for you?
Yeah, so we had a couple of brothers in this movie. One was this free-spirited, frankly, kind of lacked control over his life, and he wasn't really thriving at all. And then on the other hand, we had his brother, and his brother was like a control freak, like everyone is today, right? Trying to figure out how to optimize and gamify their lives to make it perfect. And we bumped into these romantic poets, this John Keats and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and we use these names, Keats and Coleridge, as metaphors for this free-spirited person that John Keats called this negative capability. And in other words, the ability to negate this storytelling mind and this idea that you have to categorize everything and make meaning about everything. And Coleridge, he was kind of the opposite. He was a critic, politician. He liked to figure everything out. As a matter of fact, Coleridge is the guy who coined the term suspension of disbelief that they use in Hollywood. So, I found that really interesting. But all of this is really interesting is that this was random. We didn't go out looking for any of this. It was all just coming to us in a very strange way.
So
very strange.
So let's talk about kind of what, and I guess, what is it that Keats and Coleridge came to represent for you? Because to me, there's something really interesting about, like you said, this organic nature of the way that everything unfolded. And as that unfolded, the more you could recognize what Keats and Coleridge became representative of. Yeah. It was a really interesting little spiral that was going on there.
No, it really was. I mean, I can't even emotionally describe it, how strange and powerful it was. So Coleridge came to represent, we said our thinking minds, but this analytical, rational, paranoid planning and control mindset. And we even broke it down later into, he represents like these 3 C's: certainty, comparison, and comfort. That's what he's all about. He wants to know that the story is going to work. He wants to know what everything is. He's constantly comparing himself to everyone else. And that's a lot of what the internet is driving a lot of that. And, he wants to be comfortable. He wants everything to work out. He doesn't want to deal with any tensions. He wants to know what's going to happen. Keats, on the other hand, I mean, his 3 C's, he's curious. Everything that he looks at is new and interesting. Well, he wants to know what's it all about. It's a puzzle to him. He's turned on like a wild-eyed child. He's compassionate. So he's not a hero in his own story that looks at other people as characters that are supporting his role. He looks at them and says, I wonder what they're feeling. What are they thinking? How can I make life better for them? And then the last component of his would be, so I said his curiosity, compassion, and creativity. So how can he use his spirit, his talents, his knowledge to bring relief to people, to help alleviate suffering, to make a difference, to change the world? Those 3 things drive him. And if he runs up against, well, I'm not certain, how does this compare to the other guy? You're not comfortable right now. He pushes that Coleridge mind out of his head, because Coleridge is trying to suppress this not knowing, this uncertainty, and discomfort. He's trying to always push you. No, wait a minute. How are we going to make a lot of money doing this? Let's stop right now. Maybe your movie will never be made. Do you know how many people are writing screenplays for movies? Who do you know in Hollywood? You don't live in LA. All of that stuff you need to suppress, or you won't create a thing. Elon Musk would never have created anything.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Oh, absolutely. It's extraordinary. And I think it's funny because as you were even describing the C's of Coleridge, that next C, as it were, which you mentioned before, is that it's trying to maintain that coherence. Right, we've got to fit the story. As a matter of fact, actually, if you could talk a little bit more about that, is you talk about this idea of that we live our stories. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how we live our stories, how Coleridge really kind of backs that idea of live our stories.
Well, again, he's trying to help you survive, right? Our evolutionary instincts were not designed in us to be happy. Absolutely not. We were just these paranoid animals that wanted to figure out how we're going to survive with all these other animals running around. It was that kind of environment right there, and in tribal environment and all that. So we're hardwired to kind of make predictions about the future and then look for errors in those predictions and then base our life, keep our life comfortable, don't slip out of that little story. And then everything will be okay. And what happens is that kind of puts us on autopilot so that everything we're doing all the time is the same, right? So now, we're driving to work. We don't even say to ourselves, well, I wonder why we're driving this way to work. As soon as you do that, that director's voice in your head is going to say to you, what are you, stupid? This is the best way to drive to work. Why are you even thinking about that? Don't burn calories. Let's get to work. Because his goal is to keep this thing moving. Movies are expensive things to produce. When you're on the set, he wants to keep it moving. Don't slow down. Don't worry about that guy laying on the ground over there. He's not dead. He'll be fine. This is what he does to us. So we're in our own little world, our self-referential hero of the story movie.
So what is it that you're declaring when you say the sentence, I am Keats?
That I've basically stepped out of that story and that I am living, call it a life of improv. It's not that I'm not engaging on the stage. I'm engaging. What I'm not doing is freaking out, making predictions, worrying about whether things are going the way I want them to go. And I'll tell you why. This is what happens when you start thinking that you're the hero of a story. You know that old parable, the fox and the grapes, Aesop's fable. He talks about, so I want you to picture this, right? So the fox is walking along and he sees this beautiful bunch of grapes hanging from a vine. So he's in his story now, right? I'm the fox. This is my story. And he jumps, he can't reach the grapes. And he jumps again, he can't reach the grapes. Now he starts walking away and he looks back at the grapes and he says, they were sour anyway. So what he did was he couldn't achieve a goal in his hero story. It made him feel bad about his identity because everything's about me. I'm the hero. So how do you deal with that tension? You demonize the thing that is causing you the problem. And that's what we're doing in politics. That's what we're doing in our corporations. That we're doing it with each other, right? You pull into the drive-thru and you're in a hurry to get to work. Some guy cuts in front of you to get a coffee ahead of you. All of a sudden, he's your enemy because he's stopping your story from being fulfilled the way the script's written, which is, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get my coffee. I'm going to get to work. So once you let go of that, then no one turns into your enemy anymore. You just realize that life is a chaotic, random place, and you learn to roll with it instead of fight it.
So that's interesting because before you framed it essentially as to move in the direction of living a life of improv. And so if you could talk a little bit about that idea of how do we improv in life, because it actually is random. It actually is chaotic. It's not quite the exact cause and effect that we are led to believe.
No, it's not cause and effect at all. See, that is the funny thing is that we make that story up in our head of what caused what. That's why we can look at all of these random occurrences during our past and we string them all together into a narrative that makes sense. It doesn't make any sense, really. You just weaved it all together in this funny way to have it make sense. And again, I learned that writing movies as well. If you look at some of the movies that they write, about actual people, historical figures, They just grab little pieces here and there, and they weave them all together to make whatever story they want, the meaning and the emotion behind the story. That's not their whole story.
Actually,
right?
before you go to the improv part, I'm glad you actually brought that up because, for everybody thinking, just think back even on your own life. As soon as you look backwards, and you even could use the phrase that Steve Jobs made popular in his Stanford address, you can connect the dots. When you look backwards, well, of course you can connect the dots. You get to create the narrative at that point. But there was so much more that went on. There were so many other events of how things unfolded completely randomly, completely chaotically. But we leave those parts out of the story, and we don't take a look at it. So,
that's right.
So anyway,
no.
Go ahead.
No, that's perfect. No, but you know why that's perfect? Because when people tell stories, they have to have meaning and coherence. If you got up on a stage and somebody said, tell us how you got to where you are today, and you started telling all these random things about, I had a cup of coffee with Bob, and he talked about pancakes. I mean, think about it. It just sounds crazy. So what they want to hear is a hero story.
Yeah.
Right? We like to watch hero stories. We like to read them. We like to hear them. Marketers use them on us all the time. But it's not true. What's true is you throw yourself out into the world and you're open to different experiences with different people, and you're looking to be creative. You're looking to help people, and you might bump into somebody. And when you bump into that somebody can lead you to somebody else that you bump into, and it just kind of happens. And that's improv.
Yeah.
Taking what's thrown at you and giving back without expectation of where is this going next. See, in improv, they don't know where it's going next.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's one of the things that's always fascinated me in watching improv of really all levels, let alone great levels, is just that ability for any given moment, any given scene, it can pivot on a dime because they are watching just simply what's presented to them, and they're going in a direction that calls to them. So you have no idea what's going to unfold. And I guess maybe that's sort of what, talk to us, I guess, maybe a little bit about what that life as Keats, or the Keats part of us, really does look like. How do we, where does it take us? Because you even tie it all the way to things like serendipity and aimless wandering and everything else, right. But it's not exactly loosey-goosey, as it were. It really, the magic unfolds.
Oh, no, this is strategic. Yeah. Anybody that thinks I'm saying just go sit under a tree and play the guitar, I'm not saying that at all, right? As a matter of fact, some of these things that open up, you could never predict them. It's impossible to predict them. And that's what your Coleridge mind, that's what that movie director wants. It's funny because I love to hear it in your voice. You were saying how the improv players can just do this thing. They just let go. And I had this discussion with my co-writer this morning, and she said, yeah, they're very talented. And I said to her, no, this is what you're missing about this. You see, Brad Pitt is very talented as an actor, right? Brad Pitt and a lot of these talented actors could never do improv. Mm-hmm. Because to do improv, you have to let your identity go. Yeah. You don't care what the audience is thinking about you. You're not a movie star. You're not the hero of any story anymore. So it's not the ability to figure it out and make it happen. It's the ability to not care about figuring it out. How do I let go and flow with this experience, be one with it, and let my childlike mind just let it out and let the world have what's in me, and so that's it. That's how all great scientists make their discoveries. That's how all great artists create these great works of art. They're not sitting around contemplating, I wonder if I should do this, and maybe that doesn't look right like that. No, they're listening to this inner voice that's moving them to do a certain thing, and then they're going to put it into the world to see, what does the world think, right? What do they want? When Bob Dylan said, I'm going to play electric guitar at, the Newport Folk Festival, those folk people went crazy. They tried to take an axe and cut the cord of his electric guitar. It's because he wasn't staying in his story. He wasn't being coherent. He wasn't being what they wanted Bob to be to make them comfortable. right? But he wouldn't have won. He wouldn't have won whatever. What award did he win?
Well, it's a key line that you said before, which then Dylan perfectly illustrates, is that idea of let your identity go.
Right.
We just get locked into, well, this is the image of how people know us. This is the image of how we know us. And this is exactly as you said before. Well, Phil would never do that because that's part of the construct of our identity. But the piece then, maybe if you could go further into, because it was one of the questions you even raised to a reader of I Am Keats, is that as you're going through this and you start to begin to hear that inner voice, these ideas or insights or even just feelings begin to be able to emerge as you start to step out of the story of what has been of the Coleridge part of us. But then that question is going to pop in of, how do I know if what I'm feeling is right? And I guess that's kind of what I'm posing to you, is that how do we know what to trust? What's the idea, the insight, the dream, the daydream even, that we want to lean into, that we want to trust? How do we know?
Well, you go back to the spirit of Keats and Coleridge. You ask yourself, this thing that I'm feeling, is this coming from my curious, compassionate, creative essence? Is that where it's coming from? Is it driven by my inner spirit, or am I doing this to bolster my identity somehow? Am I looking to make a lot of money and buy a new car? Am I looking to be viewed as some special entrepreneur to give, what is driving me? Or am I doing this because I saw these people suffering and I think I can bring something new to life that will get rid of some of that suffering through my creativity? It's all driven by intention. Yeah. And it's a tough battle because you have to go into you got to really be hard on yourself and ask yourself, what's my true intention here? If nobody ever gave me credit for this, would I do it anyway? Would I do it anyway? Because as soon as you start looking for credit and applause and what the audience is going to think, I guarantee you're right back into that story again. Jerry Seinfeld, he gave he said something interesting once. He said that success is the enemy of comedy. And if you really think about what he's saying is the reason why successful comedians don't want to try completely new acts is because they may lose the audience. Yeah. The audience wants to see Seinfeld and hear the typical Seinfeld jokes. So that's the enemy of comedy, but success is also the enemy of compassion. That's why a lot of big businesses don't seem to care about us anymore, because they're focused on the numbers, on Coleridge, on making the future happen a certain way.
So I guess maybe just to put this in a context or some language right now that I know just seems to be popping up everywhere, is around the language of purpose, meaning finding purpose. And I know this relates to a whole slew of work of what it is that you've even helped companies, as you were just alluding to, be able to find themselves and be able to put out in the world. How does this relate to finding or recognizing or identifying what most people would call purpose within their life?
Yeah, this was the one that really, when this insight came to me during this process, this one threw me for a little bit of a loop, because everyone is looking for the thing, whatever it is, right? So that they can wrap their purpose around, right? My purpose is to be this, or my purpose is to work here, or whatever it is. And actually, it's backwards, because what your purpose is to bring your spirit to life in whatever environments you happen to be in, and to see what that does to your life, to other people's lives. And then just don't even worry about what the thing is. I met a cashier last week that made everybody in line smile, right? So her purpose is to bring her spirit to life in whatever situations it is. And if you're doing that and you're learning, because you are the ultimate, you're the experiment that's going on here. You're the universe experimenting through you. So that's your purpose, is to bring you to life and to experiment and to see what happens. Because like I said, we're all ending up in the same place anyway. Yeah. Are you going to live this life that's curious, compassionate, creative, exciting, meaningful? That's what it's about. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah. So let me ask, because I know obviously everybody's journey is different. There is no such thing as a straight path, and the only charted course is the person that it worked for in the first place.
Right.
Where would people begin Meaning if they really want to start kind of living more into that Keats side of who they are and living within that moment and starting to hear that part of who they are, what are a few beginning points that either have worked for you or worked for others that you've seen out there that people can begin to try on and discover for themselves?
Well, I mean, if you can start turning on your curiosity, it's really interesting. If you just start paying attention to what's going on around you, I mean, actually look at things. You see little kids, they'll just get on the floor and everything that they see is amazing. Everything, a bug, the tiles, the grain in wood. So we've lost a lot of that because we're in a hurry to get someplace that there's no place there anyway, but we're in some kind of hurry. So to do that and to be compassionate, to see if you can light other people's life up a little bit. And the only way you're going to do that is you've got to realize, you have to become aware that you are in this story. And you have to start questioning everything you're doing and asking yourself, do I want to do this, or am I doing this to keep everyone around me comfortable? And if you don't want to do it, you need to start really thinking about what that thing is that you don't want to do, because you are making that choice. Yeah. This is you doing it. No one's doing this to you. That's the most interesting thing. No one has us on a leash. We have ourselves on our own leash. We're Pavlov, and we're the dog too. It is the most interesting thing to watch. So to try to snap out of that, or to work with someone, that's a really good thing to do. If you can get two people interested in this, and like just you both read the book, and then what you do, and this is what my co-writer and I did, when we started saying or doing things that characterized Coleridge, we would say, look, you're being Coleridge right now. Why are you worried about that? Why are you thinking about that? Why are you trying to control this? And you started hearing, now you can hear that voice because people are pointing it out to you. And so you get to the point where it becomes louder and louder and louder. Now you're getting aggravated with it, right? Yeah. So now you have to figure out how to ignore it. And here's the really powerful thing. Have you ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful movie. Remember how when he realized that those, with schizophrenia, the voices actually turned into people that he could see? Remember how he realized that these people are not real?
It was fantastic. Yes.
Once he realized they weren't real, it wasn't that they disappeared. Yeah. It's that they just stopped talking to him as much. Yeah. They would sit and say, he's not listening to us. And that's what happens with this Coleridge voice. When you realize he's not real, I don't have to listen to him, I am not a character in his movie, he'll start getting quieter. And over time, your Keats voice starts getting louder. So that's
a fantastic kind of description of what this journey can look like at a few key points along the way. And I think one of the things I just want to underline is, when we think back to that innocence of being a child and the way in which we're so curious and so playful, so much of what you're describing is actually so much simpler to begin than we make it out to be. And it's just moving a little bit at a time within that direction, playing a little bit in that space. And that grows our awareness. The awareness all of a sudden gives us more opportunity. The more we have opportunity, the more we try it out, the more experience we get, and off to the races we go. And so it for everybody, it actually is a simple step in that direction that really starts to open some extraordinary things for you. And so, Tom, I want to thank you for everything on the show. And I guess maybe the place to wrap up for us today, one of the things that we really encourage kind of as part of this podcast and part of the community that this is tied to, is to continue the conversation so that they didn't just get an idea from today or an inspiration or from something that you said today, but that they continue this conversation on a go-forward basis. So my question to you is, what's that kind of key idea, that key theme, that key message that you would love to see people continue the conversation on?
Look, you realize this after you've been around for a while. You realize how short life is. Everyone that dies ends up regretting that they didn't live what was inside of them. That is the top regret that everyone says on their deathbed. I wish I had done the things that were inside of me instead of trying to please everyone around me. Yeah. And if you can understand that this pleasing everyone around you is conditioned into you, this is not your essence. This is something that was done to us through our parenting, schooling, cultural conditioning, evolutionary biology, all of that. We can step out of that anytime we want and have the exciting, meaningful life that we want if we can deal with that tension in our mind.
Yeah.
Because that director is going to try to stop us from doing that. So if we can do that, then when we get ready to go, we can say, great, I had a wonderful time here. I hope all you guys have a good time too.
Tom, I want to thank you for that. It's funny with what you just mentioned, the other sign to me that you're headed in the right direction, the director's going to shout and yell a little bit louder. That's how you know you're up to good stuff.
That's exactly how you know.
Tom, I want to thank you so much for stopping in on One Idea Way and just sharing all of the insights, and particularly this story with us, and how much that can break us from our own.
I really appreciate it. Listen, if anybody wants to reach out and chat and talk, and if they go through their own little personal, stepping out of their story experience and they want to share it, I'd love to connect. So awesome. Just let everyone know. And I really had a great time.
Awesome, Tom. Everyone out there, you can certainly check out I Am Keats. Keats. I Am Keats is the book. You can certainly find the website in a similar fashion, iamkeats.com. And as Tom mentioned before, in terms of, what's our purpose? Our purpose is to bring our spirits to life. It's to whatever it is that we do that we've got in front of us. It's to bring our spirit to that. Or to end, we can also quote Howard Thurman. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it. And so with that, I want to thank you once again for stopping in on the show. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you really enjoyed it, do me a favor, let us know. You can keep the conversation going and send us a message on our Facebook page, which is simply One Idea Away. Go ahead and tag me in the post, or even just direct messages. Also, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this episode along with someone that you believe could benefit from hearing the ideas and the messages that we got into. That's pretty much why we do this. So you can just go ahead and share it from your app or email it along, whatever works for you. The point is to share, to talk, to discuss, and keep the dialogue going, because it's in those conversations that ideas can take hold and create profound shifts in perspective. That's what allows us to live life more fully, deeply, and consciously. As always, we would love to see you post a review for the podcast in iTunes or whichever app you're using. And until next time, remember, you're never more than one idea away from a whole new reality. This is Luke Iorio and One Idea Away, signing off.